The leaders of the galaxy abandoned the gentle Benzites to be slaughtered by the sadistic Kraylock. Every species fled like cowards, except for grizzled human diplomat Frank Brown. Frank watched in disgust as the last evacuation ships of the Galactic Council raced away from the besieged planet Benzar. Plumes of smoke billowed over the horizon as the ruthless Kraylock continued their relentless bombardment of the Benzite cities. Wails of terror mixed with the echoes of explosions. Trails of fleeing Benzite civilians snaked through the rubble-strewn streets. "They're citing the Prime Directive as an excuse to run," Frank muttered bitterly, his hand tightening around his plasma rifle. The hardened veteran had seen his share of battles, but this wholesale desertion of an innocent race made his stomach churn. Frank had argued passionately to the Council to send reinforcements to help the overmatched Benzites, only to be overruled by bureaucrats spouting platitudes about non-interference. He knew what fate awaited the peaceful Benzites at the claws of the Kraylock invaders: slavery, torture, extermination. "To hell with orders," Frank growled, his jaw clenched with determination. He would not abandon the Benzites like the spineless Council. If no other species would stand with them, then humanity would, even if it meant facing the wrath of both the Kraylock and his own superiors. As the roar of the last evacuation ship's engines faded, Frank noticed a lone Benzite warrior stumbling through the rubble. Purple blood leaked from a gash on his head, but the fire in his eyes remained undiminished. "I'm Frank Brown, and I'm here to help you fight," Frank replied, lowering his rifle as a sign of goodwill. "Your people don't deserve to face this alone." The Benzite hesitated, suspicion warring with desperation on his alien features. "I am Karos. How do I know this isn't some trick?" Frank looked him square in the eye. "Because if the Kraylock aren't stopped here, they'll rampage across the galaxy next. And unlike your Council friends, we humans don't abandon our allies." Slowly, Karos lowered his spear, understanding dawning. "Then let us fight together, Frank Brown, for Benzar and for the galaxy." The two soldiers, human and Benzite, turned to face the oncoming Kraylock horde. The odds were stacked against them, but they would not yield. The Benzites needed a miracle, and Frank and Karos would die trying to deliver it. Frank wiped the sweat and grime from his brow as he helped Karos shore up the defenses around the Benzite capital. They welded scrap metal to damaged walls and dug trenches for soldiers to take cover in. The Kraylock bombardment continued day and night, chipping away at the city's dwindling fortifications. During a brief respite, a group of haggard Benzite scientists led by Dr. Zyler approached Frank and Karos. "We've been working on something that could change everything," Dr. Zyler said, his voice tinged with desperation. "A prototype energy shield that could withstand the Kraylock's plasma cannons. But we need your help to finish it." Frank's eyes narrowed. "What do you need?" "Etherium," Dr. Zyler replied. "It's a rare mineral essential for the shield's power matrix. Our scans have located a deposit in a remote mining facility, but it's deep in Kraylock territory." Frank exchanged a glance with Karos. They both knew it was a suicide mission, but what choice did they have? "I'll go," Frank said. "Give me the coordinates." Karos stepped forward. "I'm going with you. You'll need backup." Frank nodded grimly. They gathered a small team of the Benzite's most skilled warriors and commandeered a Kraylock shuttle. Using captured codes, they slipped past enemy patrols and landed at the mining facility. Inside, they found a nightmarish scene. Benzite slaves, chained and beaten, toiled under the cruel watch of Kraylock overseers to extract the precious Etherium. Frank's blood boiled at the sight. He and Karos wasted no time dispatching the guards and freeing as many slaves as they could. But their rescue operation didn't go unnoticed for long. Alarms blared as Kraylock reinforcements swarmed the facility. Plasma bolts scorched the air as Frank's team fought their way to the Etherium stockpile. They grabbed as much as they could carry, but not without paying a heavy price. Several of their brave comrades fell, buying time for the others to escape. Frank's heart ached as he watched the fallen warriors disappear in the rear view as they blasted off in the shuttle. But there was no time to mourn. As they broke atmosphere, a blinking light on the console caught Frank's eye. His stomach dropped as he realized what it meant. The Kralok had planted a tracker on their ship, and it was leading the enemy armada straight to the Benzite capital. Sweat poured down Frank's brow as he pored over the star maps with Karos, searching for a way to turn the Kralok's tracking device against them. Frank's eyes landed on a dense asteroid field a few parsecs away. A plan began to form. Karos, you take the Ethereum and Xyla's team back to the city. It's a straight shot from here. I'll take the shuttle and lead the Kralok fleet on a merry chase through that asteroid field. We mined it last year as a fallback defense. Karos gripped Frank's arm. That's suicide, even for you. Frank allowed a small smirk. You know me, I don't like doing things the easy way. They quickly split into two teams, Karos taking most of the Benzite warriors, while Frank boarded the shuttle with a skeleton crew. Frank gunned the engines, heading straight for the asteroid field, while Karos descended toward the Benzite capital. The Kralok fleet took the bait, peeling off from their bombardment to pursue Frank's shuttle. Plasma blasts lit up the void around them as Frank juked and jived, leading the enemy deeper into the tumbling rocks. The Kralok ships were almost on top of them, when Frank thumbed the detonator. A chain of explosions ripped through the asteroids as the hidden mines detonated. Drones, jury-rigged with explosives, swarmed the disoriented Kralok ships. Frank watched with grim satisfaction as a third of the enemy fleet vanished in plumes of fire and shrapnel. In the Benzite capital, Dr. Xyla's hands shook as he carefully slotted the Ethereum into the shield generator. Karos and his team stood guard, tense and ready. As the final piece clicked into place, the shield thrummed to life, a shimmering dome expanding over the battered city, just as the remaining Kralok ships unleashed a vindictive barrage. Here above, Frank emerged from the asteroid field in a battered fighter, the shuttle sacrificed to the cause. He hurtled toward the besieged city, picking off Kralok ships with daring strafing runs. The odds were still against them, but they had a chance now. Then a shadow fell over the battlefield. A massive Kralok dreadnought, twice the size of any ship Frank had ever seen, loomed on the horizon. Its planet-shattering cannon began to glow, aimed directly at the shield generator. Frank knew in that instant what he had to do. There was no time for goodbyes, no time for regrets. He wrenched the controls, pointing his fighter's nose at the dreadnought's bridge. He whispered a silent apology to Karos and gunned the afterburners. The collision lit up the sky brighter than a supernova. The dreadnought's bridge erupted in a blinding flash as Frank's fighter slammed into it. The explosion ripped through the massive ship, setting off a chain reaction that tore it apart from the inside. Flaming debris rained down on the battered city below. In the shattered streets, Karos watched the dreadnought's destruction with a mix of triumph and grief. Frank's sacrifice had saved them all, but at a terrible cost. Around him, the surviving Benzites emerged from the rubble, their faces etched with sorrow and exhaustion. Days turned into weeks as the Benzites struggled to rebuild their broken city. Karos worked tirelessly alongside his people, clearing rubble and tending to the wounded. The shield generator hummed steadily, a constant reminder of Frank's legacy. In the makeshift command center, Karos huddled with Dr. Xyla and the remaining Benzite leaders. "We can't let Frank's sacrifice be in vain," Karos said, his voice heavy with resolve. "We must find a way to protect our people and take the fight to the Kralok." Dr. Xyla nodded, his eyes gleaming with determination. "I believe I can reverse engineer the shield technology to create portable versions for our soldiers. It will take time, but it's our best chance." Karos clasped the scientist's shoulder. "Do whatever it takes. In the meantime, we'll focus on rebuilding our defenses and training our warriors." As the Benzites regrouped and rearmed, a strange signal pierced the command center's comm system. Karos frowned as he listened to the message, his eyes widening in surprise. "This is Admiral Nora Hawkins of the human colony New Terra. We've heard of your bravery and the sacrifice of Frank Brown. The human race stands with you in your fight against the Kralok. We're prepared to offer supplies, weapons, and tactical support. Please respond." Karos hesitated, old instincts warring with the memory of Frank's selflessness. He glanced at the others, seeing the hope and uncertainty in their eyes. Finally, he made his decision. "Admiral Hawkins, this is Karos of the Benzite Resistance. We accept your offer of aid, but know this, we fight for our own freedom, not to trade one master for another." The response was immediate. "Understood, Karos. We're not here to conquer, but to stand as equals against a common enemy. My fleet will arrive in 3 days. Prepare your people." True to her word, Admiral Hawkins arrived with a squadron of sleek human warships, their hulls emblazoned with the new Terra emblem. Karos watched warily as the Admiral strode down the ramp of her flagship, her bearing confident and her eyes sharp. Hawkins clasped his hand firmly, her grip strong. "Karos, I wish we were meeting under better circumstances, but we're here now, and we're ready to fight alongside you." Over the next weeks, the humans and Benzites worked to integrate their forces and plan their next moves. Dr. Zyler and the human engineers collaborated to mass-produce portable shield generators, while Karos and Hawkins pored over star maps, identifying key Kralok targets. Together, they launched a series of lightning raids on Kralok supply depots and shipyards, striking hard and fast before the enemy could react. The Benzite warriors, now equipped with shield generators and human plasma rifles, fought with renewed ferocity, their armor glowing with the shimmering energy fields. The tide of the war began to turn as the Kralok suffered mounting losses, their once unstoppable advance grinding to a halt. But even as they celebrated their victories, Karos couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. His suspicions were confirmed when a Benzite spy returned from a deep cover mission, her face grim. "The Kralok are planning a massive assault on the human colony," she reported, her voice taut with urgency. "They mean to make an example of them, to crush the spirit of any who would aid us." Karos and Hawkins exchanged a knowing look. They had to act fast, to protect their newfound allies and keep the Kralok from regaining the momentum. "Assemble our best warriors," Karos ordered, his voice ringing with authority. "And get me a line to the human colony. We're not going to let the Kralok dictate this war any longer." In the war room of the Benzite capital, Karos and Admiral Hawkins pored over the schematics of the Kralok homeworld. The flickering holodisplay cast an eerie blue glow over their faces as they discussed their audacious plan. "If we can strike at their weapons factory, we can cripple their ability to wage war," Hawkins said, her eyes narrowed in concentration. "But it won't be easy. The facility is heavily guarded." Karos nodded grimly. "We'll need our best warriors for this mission, small and fast in and out before they know what hit them." He turned to the human beside him, a battle-hardened soldier with a scar running down his cheek. "Captain Riley, I want you on this mission. Your expertise in covert ops will be invaluable." Riley saluted sharply. "Yes, sir, I'll handpick a team of our most skilled operatives." As the plan took shape, Karos couldn't shake the feeling that this was their last desperate chance. If they failed, the Kralok would unleash hell on the human colony, and then Benzar. There could be no room for error. 3 days later, Karos found himself crouched in the belly of a captured Kralok shuttle, his heart pounding as they approached the warp gate. Beside him, Riley checked his plasma rifle for the 100th time, his jaw clenched with tension. The shuttle shuddered as it passed through the gate, the stars stretching into streaks of light. When they emerged on the other side, the Kralok homeworld loomed before them, a sprawling mass of twisted metal and pulsing lights. Karos and his team, a mix of human and Benzite commandos, quickly donned their disguises. The sophisticated tech molded to their bodies, transforming them into hulking Kralok warriors. They slipped out of the shuttle and into the bustling streets of the capital city. Towering spires of black metal pierced the smoggy sky, while ground transports rumbled past on elevated highways. The air was thick with the stench of industrial waste and the chatter of guttural Kralok voices. Karos's skin crawled beneath the disguise as they made their way towards the weapons factory. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to fight, but he forced himself to move with the confident swagger of a Kralok soldier. At the factory gates, a pair of guards scanned their falsified ID chips. Karos held his breath, his hand tightening on his concealed plasma pistol, but the chips held up, and the guards waved them through with a grunt. Inside, the factory was a cavernous space filled with assembly lines and robotic arms. Massive plasma cannons and rows of armored vehicles stretched as far as the eye could see. The commandos split into teams, each one tasked with planting explosives at key structural points. Karos and Riley made their way to the central control room, their footsteps echoing on the metal grating. They had just finished setting the final charge when alarms began to blare. "Intruder alert, intruder alert!" A mechanical voice boomed over the loudspeakers. Kralok security forces poured into the factory, their plasma rifles blazing. Karos and Riley dove for cover, returning fire as they desperately tried to fight their way out. A searing bolt caught Riley in the leg, sending him tumbling to the ground with a cry of pain. Karos grabbed him by the collar and hauled him behind a crate, his heart racing as he saw the blood pooling beneath his friend. "Leave me," Riley gasped, his face pale. "Complete the mission." Karos shook his head fiercely. "No man left behind, that's the human way, isn't it?" He hoisted Riley over his shoulders in a fireman's carry, staggering under the weight, as he laid down covering fire with his free hand. The commandos fought their way through the factory, the air thick with smoke and the stench of burning metal. They burst out of the factory gates, plasma bolts sizzling past their heads as they sprinted for the extraction point. But their shuttle was a smoking ruin, hit by a Kralok missile as it waited for them. Karos's mind raced as he surveyed the wreckage. They were trapped on the Kralok homeworld, with no way out and the entire city on high alert. He made a split-second decision. The humans and Benzites protested, but Karos silenced them with a fierce glare. He knew what had to be done. He was expendable, but Riley and the others were not. As the commandos reluctantly retreated into the shadows with Riley, Karos turned to face the oncoming Kralok forces. He ripped off his disguise, revealing his true form, and let out a battle cry that echoed through the streets. Plasma bolts lit up the night as Karos fought like a man possessed, his rifle spitting death with every trigger pull. Kralok warriors fell before him, but more kept coming, a relentless tide of claws and fangs. In the distance, Karos heard the rumble of the charges detonating. The factory erupted in a massive fireball, the shockwave knocking him off his feet. He felt a fierce surge of pride. They had done it. They had struck a blow against the Kralok that would be felt across the galaxy. As the Kralok closed in around him, Karos raised his rifle defiantly. He would make his last stand here on this alien world, light years from home. He would die as he had lived, fighting for those who could not fight for themselves. The Kralok opened fire, and Karos disappeared in a blaze of plasma fire. His last thoughts were of Frank, of the sacrifice he had made for the Benzite people. In the end, they had both given their lives for something greater than themselves. On the outskirts of the city, Riley and the other commandos watched as the factory burned, the flames reflecting in their eyes. They knew that Karos was gone, but his sacrifice would never be forgotten. As they limped towards a hidden Benzite safe house, Riley clutched a data drive in his hand. It contained vital intel on the Kralok's military infrastructure, gleaned from the factory's computers. With this information, the Benzites and their human allies could strike back against the Kralok like never before. The war was far from over, but thanks to Karos and his team they now had a fighting chance, and as long as there were those willing to stand against tyranny, no matter the cost, there would always be hope. With the Kralok weapons factory reduced to smoldering ruins and Karos missing in action, the human-Benzite alliance wasted no time pressing their advantage. Admiral Hawkins and her fleet coordinated with the Benzite resistance, striking hard and fast at Kralok military installations across the sector. Plasma cannons flashed in the void as human and Benzite ships engaged the enemy, their shields flickering under the onslaught. Kralok vessels erupted into fireballs as the Alliance's superior tactics and technology overwhelmed their defenses. On the ground, Benzite warriors armed with portable shield generators and human plasma rifles stormed Kraylock fortifications. The once invincible Kraylock soldiers fell before the determined onslaught, their claws and fangs no match for the Alliance's firepower. As the Kraylock's grip on Benzar weakened, the Galactic Council finally took notice. A sleek, Allurian diplomatic vessel arrived in orbit, requesting an audience with the Alliance leaders. Admiral Hawkins and the Benzite High Command gathered in the war room, their faces lined with exhaustion, but their eyes gleaming with hard-won triumph. The Allurian ambassador, a tall, slender being with iridescent scales, addressed them with a tone of begrudging respect. "The Council commends your victories against the Kraylock," the ambassador said, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. "We are prepared to broker a peace treaty between your forces and the Kraylock Empire." Admiral Hawkins leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "And what terms does the Council propose?" The ambassador hesitated, his scales rippling with unease. "The Kraylock demand the surrender of the human colony and your extradition, Admiral. They hold you responsible for the attack on their homeworld." The room erupted into shouts of outrage. The Benzite commander slammed his fist on the table, his voice booming. "Unacceptable! The humans are our allies, not bargaining chips." Admiral Hawkins held up a hand for silence, her face a mask of icy calm. "The human colony will not surrender, and I will not be handed over to the Kraylock. We fought this war to free the Benzites from tyranny, not to trade one oppressor for another." The Allurian ambassador's scales flushed a deep crimson. "The Council will have no choice but to impose sanctions on your colony if you do not comply. You risk isolating yourselves from the galactic community." Before Admiral Hawkins could respond, the doors to the war room burst open. A figure stumbled in, his armor scorched and his face haggard. Gasps of shock and joy filled the room as they recognized the newcomer. It was Karos. The Benzite warrior grinned wearily, his eyes sparking with determination. "Reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated." As the room erupted into a chorus of questions, Karos held up a data chip, his expression grim. "I bring urgent news. The Kraylock have a secret bioweapons facility on the moon of Zanak. They're planning to unleash a plague that will wipe out all resistance." Admiral Hawkins turned to the Allurian ambassador, her voice cold as the void. "It seems your negotiations are premature, Ambassador. The Kraylock have violated the Council's own laws against bioweapons. We must act now to stop this threat." The ambassador's scales paled to a sickly grey. He swallowed hard, his forked tongue darting out nervously. "The Council will need time to verify this information and deliberate." "We don't have time," Karos growled. "Every moment we waste, the Kraylock grow closer to unleashing hell on the galaxy. We must strike now, with or without the Council's blessing." Admiral Hawkins nodded, her jaw set with determination. She turned to her officers, her voice ringing with authority. "Prepare the fleet. We're going to Zanak." As the war room erupted into a flurry of activity, Admiral Hawkins pulled Karos aside. "I thought we'd lost you," she said softly, her eyes searching his face. "How did you survive?" Karos's gaze turned distant, his voice heavy with memory. "I had help. There's a resistance movement within the Kraylock, those who oppose the Empire's cruelty. They saved me, nursed me back to health, and they gave me the intel on the bioweapons facility." Admiral Hawkins clasped his shoulder, her grip firm. "Then let's make sure their bravery wasn't in vain. We'll end this threat once and for all." The journey to Zanak was tense, the Alliance fleet navigating through treacherous asteroid fields and ionized nebulae to avoid Kraylock patrols. As they approached the moon, long-range scans revealed the extent of the Kraylock's defenses. A network of orbital platforms bristled with plasma cannons, while squadrons of Kraylock fighters patrolled the airspace. On the surface, the bioweapons facility was protected by a shimmering energy shield and ringed by anti-aircraft batteries. Admiral Hawkins and Karos studied the holographic display of the battlefield, their faces grim. "A frontal assault would be suicide," Hawkins muttered, her fingers tracing potential approach vectors. We need to find a way to penetrate their defenses. Karos zoomed in on a section of the facility's perimeter, his eyes narrowing. There, he said, pointing to a small gap in the shield coverage. If we can send in a small team to disable the shield generator, it'll create an opening for our forces. Hawkins nodded, her mind racing. It's risky, but it's our best shot. We'll need our most skilled infiltrators for this mission. As the fleet took up position just outside of the Kralok's sensor range, Karos and a hand-picked team of human and Benzite commandos prepared for the drop. They checked their weapons and gear, their faces etched with a mix of determination and apprehension. Karos clasped forearms with each member of the team, his voice low and intense. We've come too far to fail now. Remember your training, trust in each other, and we'll see this through. The dropship hurtled towards the moon's surface, its stealth systems engaged to evade detection. As they approached the landing zone, the commandos could see the shimmering dome of the energy shield looming ahead, a sickly green glow emanating from the bioweapons facility within. The ship touched down in a cloud of dust, the hatch sliding open with a hiss of hydraulics. Karos and his team emerged into the harsh glare of Zanak's twin suns, their boots crunching on the rocky terrain. They moved swiftly and silently towards the shield perimeter, using the jagged terrain for cover. As they neared the gap in the shield, a sudden burst of plasma fire erupted from a concealed Kralok turret. The team scattered, diving for cover behind boulders and outcroppings. Karos returned fire, his plasma rifle spitting bolts of searing energy at the turret. The Kralok gunner fell, his body tumbling from the turret in a spray of dark blood. "Move, move!" Karos barked, waving his team forward. They sprinted towards the shield gap, their hearts pounding in their chests. As they slipped through the opening, a piercing alarm began to wail, echoing off the facility's metal walls. The Kralok knew they were coming. The team raced towards the shield generator, plasma bolts sizzling past their heads as Kralok soldiers poured out from the facility. Karos and his commandos took cover behind supply crates and machinery, returning fire with grim determination. Inch by bloody inch, they fought their way towards the generator, the air thick with the stench of ozone and charred flesh. As they neared their target, a massive Kralok warrior emerged from the shadows, his armor bristling with spikes and his eyes glowing with hate. The warrior charged at Karos, a roar of fury tearing from his throat. Karos met him head-on, his plasma rifle forgotten as he drew a crackling energy blade from his belt. The two warriors clashed in a blur of slashing claws and humming plasma, their movements almost too fast to follow. Karos ducked and weaved, his blade scoring deep gashes in the Kralok's armor. But the Kralok was relentless, his blows fueled by rage and bloodlust. A backhand strike sent Karos flying, his blade clattering to the ground. The Kralok loomed over him, a vicious grin splitting his fanged maw. Suddenly a plasma bolt seared through the Kralok's skull, dropping him in a heap. Karos looked up to see one of the human commandos, a sniper named Reeves, lowering his rifle with a nod. Reeves shrugged, a tight smile on his weathered face. "Couldn't let you have all the fun." Together they pushed towards the shield generator, the rest of the team close behind. They could hear the hum of the generator growing louder, feel the crackle of its energy field in the air. As they rounded the final corner, they skidded to a halt, their eyes widening in horror. The generator room was filled with rows of containment pods, each one housing a Benzite or human prisoner. Tubes and wires snaked from the pods to the generator itself, their bodies used as living batteries to power the shield. Karos felt a surge of rage and revulsion. The Kralok's cruelty knew no bounds. They had to end this now. He turned to his team, his voice hard as steel. "Plant the charges, we're taking this place down." The commandos moved swiftly, attaching plasma charges to the generator's key structural points. As they worked, a soft groan emanated from one of the pods. Karos peered inside to see a Benzite female, her scales dull and her eyes clouded with pain. "Hold on," he whispered, his fingers flying over the pod's control panel. "We're going to get you out of here." The pod hissed open, and the female tumbled into Karos's arms. She looked up at him, her voice a rasping whisper. "You must hurry. The Kralok. They're planning to test the bioweapon. On us." Karos's blood ran cold. They were out of time. He handed the female off to one of the commandos, his voice urgent. "Get her to the extraction point. We'll handle the rest." As the commando carried the female to safety, Karos and the others finished planting the charges. They had to time their escape perfectly. Too soon, and the Kralok would have a chance to disarm the explosives. Too late, and they'd be caught in the blast radius. Karos's comm crackled to life. Admiral Hawkins's voice tense with anticipation. "Charges set, prepare for detonation." He looked around at his team, seeing the determination and fear in their eyes. They all knew the stakes, the price of failure. "Move out," he barked, leading the way back towards the shield gap. They ran, plasma bolts sizzling past them as the Kralok soldiers closed in. They were halfway to the gap when a searing pain exploded in Karos's shoulder. He stumbled, his vision blurring as he saw a Kralok sniper lowering his rifle from a distant rooftop. Reeves was at his side in an instant, slinging Karos's arm over his shoulders. "I've got you, buddy, just keep moving." Together, they hobbled towards the gap, the rest of the team providing covering fire. They could hear the Kralok's guttural shouts growing closer, smell the acrid stench of their weapons. As they reached the gap, Karos's comm crackled again. "Detonation in 5, 4, 3. With a final burst of desperate energy, they hurled themselves through the gap, tumbling to the rocky ground beyond. Behind them, the shield flickered and died as the explosions ripped through the generator. Karos rolled onto his back, his chest heaving as he watched the facility erupt into flames. Secondary explosions tore through the compound as the bioweapons labs ignited, sending plumes of noxious gas into the sky. In the distance, he could see the Alliance fleet descending on the Kralok defenses, their ships tearing through the orbital platforms like avenging angels. It was a sight he had dreamed of for so long, a glimmer of hope in the darkness of war. Reeves helped him to his feet, a fierce grin on his face. "We did it, Karos. We struck a blow they won't soon forget." Karos nodded, his own smile grim and tired. "But the war isn't over yet. The Kralok will be desperate now, more dangerous than ever." He looked up at the sky, seeing the Alliance ships and the burning wreckage of the Kralok facility. Somewhere up there, Admiral Hawkins was leading the charge, carrying the fight to the enemy. For a moment he allowed himself to feel a flicker of pride, of hope. They had come so far, sacrificed so much, and now with the Kralok's bioweapons destroyed and their defenses shattered, victory was within reach. But as he turned to limp towards the waiting dropship, Karos couldn't shake the feeling that their greatest challenge was yet to come. The Kralok were wounded, cornered, and like any wounded beast, they would lash out with all the fury and desperation they had left. They would have to be ready, to stand united against the coming storm. For the sake of the Benzites, the humans, and all the free peoples of the galaxy, they could not falter now. The dropship's engines roared to life as Karos and his team clambered aboard. The future was uncertain, the path ahead fraught with peril. But as the ship lifted off, carrying them back to the fleet and the battles to come, Karos felt a renewed sense of purpose, of determination. They would see this through no matter the cost. For their fallen comrades, for their worlds, for the dream of a galaxy free from tyranny and fear, they would fight on. Whatever came next, they would face it together as allies and friends, bound by the unbreakable ties of shared struggle and sacrifice. The Kralok had unleashed the demons of war upon the stars, but in doing so, they had forged something far stronger, far more enduring. They had forged the spirit of resistance, the indomitable will of those who refused to bow before the darkness. And in that spirit, Karos knew, lay the seeds of victory, the promise of a brighter tomorrow. As the dropship soared into the battle-scarred sky, Karos closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the fight ahead. But beneath that weight, beneath the pain and the loss and the fear, he felt something else, something that had been forged in the crucible of war. He felt hope, burning bright and fierce and unquenchable, and with that hope he knew anything was possible. As Karos and Admiral Hawkins fought their way through the twisting corridors of the bioweapons facility, the stench of death and desperation hung heavy in the recycled air. Kralok soldiers fell before their plasma rifles, their dying screams echoing off the metal walls. Suddenly they burst into a cavernous chamber, and the sight that greeted them made their blood run cold. Row upon row of containment pods lined the walls, each one housing a writhing, screaming Benzite. Tubes and wires snaked from the pods to a central control console, where a holographic display showed a rotating double helix, the telltale sign of a viral genome. Admiral Hawkins rushed to the console, her fingers flying over the controls. "Dear God," she whispered, her face pale, "it's the Theta virus. The Kralok have resurrected it." Karos felt a surge of horror and rage. He had heard stories of the Theta virus, how it had swept through the human colonies like a plague, killing millions. If the Kralok unleashed it on Benzar. A weak cough drew their attention to one of the pods. Karos peered inside, his heart leaping into his throat. "Talin!" His brother, his scales dull and his eyes clouded with pain, looked up at him. "Karos, you came—" Karos tore open the pod, gathering Talin in his arms. "I'm here, brother, I'm here." Talin gripped Karos's arm, his voice urgent. "The virus, they've modified it. Targets Benzites, have to destroy it." Hawkins knelt beside them, her voice gentle. "We will, Talin, we'll stop them." Talin shook his head. "Not enough, main storage chamber, have to destroy it, or all is lost." Karos and Hawkins exchanged a grim look. They knew what had to be done. They split their forces, Hawkins taking a team to free the rest of the prisoners, while Karos and Talin headed for the storage chamber. They moved swiftly, planting explosives at key structural points. Just as they were about to arm the final charge, a plasma bolt sizzled past Karos's head. He whirled, coming face to face with a hulking Kralok warrior, his armor emblazoned with the insignia of General Zorgax. "Leaving so soon?" Zorgax sneered, his fangs glinting in the harsh light. "And just when we were getting to know each other." Karos shoved Talin behind him, raising his rifle. "Sorry to cut the party short." A scream tore through the chamber. Karos turned, his heart stopping. Talin lay on the ground, a plasma bolt burning through his chest. Zorgax stood over him, his rifle smoking. "No!" Karos roared, lunging at Zorgax. They grappled, rolling across the floor in a tangle of claws and fists. Out of the corner of his eye, Karos saw Talin crawling towards the final charge, his lifeblood pooling beneath him. With a final desperate effort, Talin armed the explosives, his hand falling away as the light faded from his eyes. Karos felt a wail of anguish building in his throat, but there was no time for grief, no time for goodbyes. He had to finish this. With a savage twist, he broke free of Zorgax's grip and slammed his fist into the detonator. The world erupted into fire and pain, the shockwave hurling him across the room. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard Hawkins's voice over the comm. "Karos, the self-destruct bus, it's been triggered. We have to evacuate now." Karos staggered to his feet, his vision blurring. He looked down at Talin's body, a final apology on his lips. Then he turned and ran, the countdown echoing in his mind. He burst out of the facility, stumbling towards the waiting dropships. Hawkins was there, herding the last of the prisoners aboard. She grabbed Karos's arm, hauling him into the ship. As they lifted off, the ground heaved beneath them. The facility exploded, a pillar of fire rising into the starry sky. Karos watched it burn, his heart heavy with the weight of all they had lost and all they still had to fight for. The Theta virus was destroyed, but the war was far from over. And as the dropship hurtled towards the stars, Karos knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, human and Benzite, united against the darkness. As the explosion ripped through the bioweapons facility, Admiral Hawkins, Karos, and the rescued prisoners sprinted for their lives. Flames licked at their heels as they raced through collapsing corridors, dodging falling debris and choking on acrid smoke. They burst out into the open, stumbling and coughing, as the ground heaved beneath their feet. A human rescue ship swooped down from the sky, its ramp lowering to receive them. They half ran, half tumbled into the ship's hold, the ramp slamming shut behind them as the pilot gunned the engines. The ship rocketed away just as the facility exploded in a blinding flash. The shockwave slammed into the hull, sending them sprawling across the deck. For a moment, there was only the sound of ragged breathing and the distant roar of the explosion. Then the rescued prisoners began to cheer, their voices hoarse with exhaustion and relief. Admiral Hawkins and Karos exchanged a weary grin, their armor scorched and their faces streaked with soot. They had done it. The Theta virus was destroyed. The celebration was cut short by a sudden transmission from the Benzite homeworld. Karos's face fell as he listened to the urgent message, his fists clenching at his sides. "General Zorgak survived," he said grimly. "He's taken command of the Kralok forces and is preparing for a final assault on the capital." Admiral Hawkins cursed under her breath. They had struck a major blow against the Kralok, but the war was far from over. They had to get back to Benzar and prepare for the coming storm. As the rescue ship streaked through the stars, Karos and Hawkins huddled with their officers, planning their next move. They knew that the fate of both their species hung in the balance. If Zorgak succeeded in taking the Benzite capital, it would be a devastating blow to the resistance. When they arrived on Benzar, they were greeted as heroes. Crowds of Benzites lined the streets, cheering and waving flags as the rescued prisoners were reunited with their families. But the celebration was short-lived, as the grim reality of the situation set in. The Human-Benzite alliance immediately set to work, fortifying the city's defenses. Karos oversaw the deployment of the portable shield generators, while Admiral Hawkins coordinated with the fleet to establish a defensive perimeter around the planet. As they worked, a surprising message came through from the Galactic Council. The Illurian ambassador appeared on the screen, his iridescent scales shimmering. "The Council has been following your progress with great interest," he said. "We recognize the severity of the situation and the bravery of your alliance. We cannot stand idly by while the Kralok threaten the peace and stability of the galaxy." Admiral Hawkins and Karos exchanged a shocked look. They had never expected the Council to intervene directly in the conflict. "We are sending a fleet to support you in the coming battle," the ambassador continued. "Led by our most powerful warship, the Peacemaker. They will arrive within the day." As the transmission ended, a cheer went up from the human and Benzite officers. With the Council's support, they stood a fighting chance against Zorgax and his forces. But their newfound hope was short-lived. Alarms blared across the city as Kralok dropships appeared in the sky, their hulls glinting in the sunlight. The final battle for Benzar had begun. In orbit, the human Benzite and Council fleets engaged the Kralok in a titanic space battle. Plasma beams and missiles crisscrossed the void as ships maneuvered and fired, their shields flaring under the onslaught. On the ground, Karos led a daring counterattack against the Kralok landing zones. Human and Benzite soldiers fought side by side, their weapons blazing as they pushed back against the invaders. The streets of the capital became a war zone, echoing with the screams of the wounded and the clash of weapons. Amidst the chaos, Karos caught sight of a familiar figure. General Zorgak strode through the battle, his armor gleaming and his eyes burning with hate. Karos felt a surge of rage and grief, remembering his fallen brother. With a roar of challenge, he charged towards Zorgax, his plasma blade flashing. The Kralok general met him head-on, his own blade crackling with energy. They clashed in a whirlwind of strikes and parries, their personal grudge fueling every blow. Around them, the battle raged on, human and Benzite fighting desperately to hold the line against the Kralok onslaught. In the skies above, the Council's Peacemaker unleashed a devastating barrage on the Kralok flagship, its advanced weapons tearing through the enemy shields. But on the ground, the tide was turning against the Alliance. The Kralok forces were too numerous, too well equipped. Karos's troops were being pushed back, step by bloody step. Karos parried Zorgax's flurry of blows, the plasma blades hissing and spitting as they clashed. The Kralok general leered at him with predatory eyes, their dance of death taking them closer to the edge of the roof. Below, the battle for the Benzite capital raged on, plasma bolts and explosions lighting up the twilight. Suddenly, an urgent voice crackled over Karos's comm. "Karos, it's Hawkins. The shield is failing. Dr. Xylar sabotaged it from within. He's a Kralok sleeper agent." Zorgax sensed his distraction and lunged, his blade slicing through Karos's defenses. Searing pain erupted in his shoulder as the plasma seared his flesh. Karos staggered back, his grip on his own weapon faltering. "Admiral, you have to protect the city," he gritted out, dodging another of Zorgax's vicious strikes. "Use the fleet, buy us time." Through the haze of pain, Karos saw the human ships move into position, their hulls gleaming in the fading light. They interposed themselves between the city and the Kralok armada, a living shield of metal and courage. The Kralok ships opened fire, their plasma cannons tearing into the human vessels. Hulls buckled and ruptured, venting atmosphere and debris. But the humans held the line, their sacrifice a beacon of hope amidst the carnage. On the rooftop, Zorgax pressed his advantage, hammering at Karos's weakening defenses. "You're finished, Benzite," he snarled. "Your city will fall, and your people will be slaves once more." Karos rallied himself, his eyes blazing with defiance. "Not while I still draw breath." They clashed again, plasma blades whirling in deadly arcs. But Zorgax fought with the strength of desperation, and Karos was weakening, his blood dripping onto the scorched metal of the rooftop. In a last desperate gambit, Zorgax activated a device on his wrist. His form shimmered and vanished, his outline barely visible against the smoke-filled sky. Karos whirled, trying to anticipate the invisible attack, but Zorgax's blade found its mark, stabbing deep into Karos's chest. He cried out, the pain overwhelming him, and sank to his knees. Zorgax loomed over him, his cloaking field deactivating. His eyes glinted with cruel triumph as he raised his blade for the killing blow. A roar split the air, primal and filled with rage. A figure slammed into Zorgax, sending them both tumbling across the rooftop. Karos blinked, his vision blurry. It couldn't be. Talin, his brother, battered and bloody but very much alive, grappled with Zorgax at the edge of the roof. They teetered there, locked in a deadly embrace. "Talin," Karos croaked, trying to rise. But his body betrayed him, his strength leaching away with each labored breath. And then he and Zorgax plunged over the edge, disappearing into the smoke and chaos below. Karos dragged himself to the precipice, his heart shattering. He peered over the edge but saw only the distant ground, lost in the shadows of war. Cha'Chir rose from the Benzite lines, ragged but filled with new resolve. The human ships, battered but unbroken, had bought them the time they needed. The Benzite forces surged forward, meeting the Kralok invaders head-on in a clash of plasma and steel. Karos watched them, his vision dimming. He had given everything, and still it might not be enough. But as he slipped into unconsciousness, he knew one thing with crystalline certainty. He would not stop fighting, not until his last breath, his last beat of blood. For his brother, for Frank, for all those who had sacrificed, for the dream of a galaxy where the Benzites and humans could live in peace, free from the shadow of tyranny. That dream was worth fighting for, worth dying for. And fight he would to the bitter end. The battle raged on, the fate of the Benzite homeworld hanging by a thread. Suddenly a sleek Kralok shuttle broke through the chaos, its shields flickering as it took fire from both sides. It hurtled towards the Benzite command center, trailing smoke and sparks. Karos and Admiral Hawkins watched in disbelief as the shuttle landed heavily in the courtyard, its ramp lowering with a hiss of hydraulics. A lone figure emerged, hands raised in surrender. It was Commander Vex, Zorgax's second-in-command. "I come in peace," Vex shouted, his voice hoarse. "I wish to defect. Zorgax's tactics are madness. I can help you end this war." Karros and Hawkins exchanged a wary glance. Could this be a trick? But the desperation in Vex's eyes seemed genuine. They cautiously approached, weapons trained on the Kralok commander. "Why should we trust you?" Hawkins demanded. "Amnesty," Vex said. "A fair trial for my crimes. I will face judgment, but on civilized terms." Hawkins looked to Karros, the decision heavy between them. The Benzite nodded slowly. "Very well, but betray us and no force in this galaxy will save you." With Vex's knowledge, the tide of the battle shifted. The Alliance struck at the Kralok's weak points, sowing chaos and confusion among their ranks. Zorgax's orders went unheeded as his chain of command crumbled. On the front lines, Kralok soldiers began to lay down their arms. They came forward in groups, hands raised pleading for mercy. The fighting slowed, then stopped, an eerie silence falling over the ruined city. Karros stood amid the rubble, his armor stained with blood and soot. He looked out over the shattered remains of his homeworld, the once proud spires now little more than broken teeth against the sky. The cost had been high, too high. The human fleet, so mighty and fierce, now limped in orbit, its ships scarred and battered, and the Benzites, so many lost, Talin, Dr. Zyler, countless others, their lives snuffed out in the crucible of war. There would be time to mourn, to honor the fallen. But for now there was work to be done. The Galactic Council convened, their holograms flickering to life in the war room. They debated the future of the Benzites, the role of the humans in the aftermath. Restrictions were placed on the human colony, their access to technology limited, their movements scrutinized. The humans bristled at the Council's heavy hand, their alliance with the Benzites strained. Karros, hailed as a savior by his people, shouldered the burden of rebuilding. The scars ran deep, the wounds still raw. It would be a long road, a hard road. But he would walk it, step by step, in memory of those who had given all. The galaxy moved on, the war fading into memory. But for the humans and the Benzites, the struggle was far from over. Old rivalries resurfaced, new challenges emerged. The future was uncertain, the spectre of conflict always lurking in the shadows. And so the story ended, not with triumph, but with a question. What next? For the Benzites, for the humans, for the galaxy at large? Only time would tell. The drums of war had faded, but their echo lingered, a reminder of the fragile nature of peace. Karros stood at the window of his office, gazing out at the ruins of his city. The work of rebuilding had begun, but the scars would remain, a testament to the sacrifices made. He turned back to his desk, to the stacks of reports and plans that awaited his attention. It was a daunting task, a heavy burden, but he would bear it for the sake of his people, for the memory of those lost. Across the stars on the distant human colony, Admiral Hawkins faced a different set of challenges. The Council's restrictions chafed, their mistrust a bitter pill to swallow. But she would not let it break her, or her people. They would adapt, as they always had. They would find a way forward no matter the obstacles. The alliance between humans and Benzites, once so strong, now showed signs of strain. Old grievances resurfaced, new resentments festered. But there were those on both sides who still believed, who clung to the hope of a better tomorrow. And so life went on, in the shadow of war, in the face of an uncertain future. The galaxy waited, watched, wondered. What would come next? Only the turning of the pages would reveal the answer, the next chapter in the story of the Benzites, the humans, and all the races of the stars. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.